Now, I think President John F. Kennedy and his wife Jackie were famous for their hosting of these gala dinners and showcasing American culture. Um, Tell us more about that. I'm going to go to, I think, what is one of their menus.
Yes, as you know, that particularly Jacqueline Kennedy, our youngest First Lady, brought a level of elegance to the White House that had not been seen for quite some time. And she was very much focused on France in her fashion
Yes,
and
Chanel. I think she loved the Chanel suits.
Chanel.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
How old was she, by the way? You said she was the
She was
youngest.
in her early 30s.
Oh, wow. Beautiful, too.
And yes, and she wanted to make sure that the White House. She did a number of things for the White House, including acquiring art pieces. She wanted the best of American art to be in the White House. She wanted beautiful furniture, and she acquired old pieces that had long since been disappeared and been sold. She bought them, brought them back, restored them, and really created the White House as it's experienced today. Because up until that time, presidents and first ladies would come and go, and sometimes they would sell the furniture, they'd bring their own, and they would move out with it. And she created the permanent collection. And for entertaining, she was very focused on elegant entertaining, particularly with French menus and French wines. And in looking at the menu card that you have selected here, it's in French. Today the menus are in English. It's written in French. She's got French menu. All three courses sound as though they're French in design, and then there's actually, this is unusual because there are three different wines. It looks like a German to start, Almaden from California for the main course, and then a Dom Perignon for the final course. So this was unusual though, because typically she would have French wines for all three courses.
Oh, wow. And is it the Dom Perignon that has a connection with James Bond?
Yes, yes. Her husband, John Kennedy, was a fan of the Ian Fleming novels and movies. They just started to come out during his presidency. And in 1962, the first James Bond movie, there was a scene, it's called Dr. No, and there was a scene where James Bond was trying to defend himself while sitting at a dining table, and he stood up and he grabbed a bottle of champagne and he was about to hit the guard with it. And Dr. No calmly says, "That's a Dom Perignon 55. It would be a pity to break it." And
That's great.
Bond sets it back down and he says, "I prefer the 53 myself," as he's sitting it on the table. If you look, that was 1962. Just 2 or 3 months later, there was a state dinner at the White House, and the wine that was served, as was it the one you're showing on the screen, was the Dom Perignon 1955.
Oh,
And
lovely.
which I thought this was a case where pop culture was influencing politics and diplomatic entertaining. And in fact, just as a footnote, Kennedy was such an enthusiast of the James Bond movies that the next movie that came along, From Russia with Love, it was shown to him in a private showing at the White House in November of 1963, 3 days before he left for Dallas. It was the last film he ever saw.
Oh, wow. That gives me goosebumps. Wow. And just we'll stay with JFK and Jackie, but didn't Bill Clinton make a toast in the UK when he was visiting that was sort of based on a
Yes.
James Bond reference? What was that?
Yeah, I learned in this book that toasting is such a central part of diplomacy, and it has been going back to the earliest days of civilization. I learned a lot about toasts of the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, and how toasting evolved and became part of public gatherings and important events, and then learned a lot about the president's toasts. And they were usually more serious, but every once in a while there would be kind of a fun one. And Bill Clinton was in London for a toast, and it was his turn at the official state dinner. It was with the Prime Minister to make a toast, and he kind of keyed off of another famous line from the James Bond movies that martini lovers, I'm sure, remember. But Bill Clinton raised his glass and he said, keying off of the 007 line, he said, "May the relationship between our two countries always be solid and firm, never shaken, never stirred."
Oh, I like that. Very suave, very suave.
Yes.
That's great. And so now we're back to JFK and Jackie. Where are they here?
Uh, that it looks like it's on their South American trip.
Yes, Mexico, I think.
And yes, in Mexico, and there were quite a few interesting toasting experiences with Mexico. Two I would point out. They weren't with JFK, but they were both with Jimmy Carter actually.
Ah,
He was down in Mexico for a visit with the Mexican president, and there's always a reciprocal lunch. So on a diplomatic event, typically there'll be a big dinner that the host gives for the visiting head of state, and then the next day there'll be a reciprocal lunch where the visiting head of state entertains. And at the reciprocal lunch toast, the Mexican president stood up to make his toast, and apparently things weren't going so well. And he went on this long, critical speech about the United States and criticized America on several different fronts. And Jimmy Carter stood up and reciprocated by making an equally critical toast about Mexico, including talking about Montezuma's revenge. And it was known as the toast of insults. Well, since then, the protocol was established that it's meant to be positive and only 2 or 3 minutes long. But the other thing Jimmy Carter did that every president follows to this day was he had the president of Mexico back at the White House, and at the beginning of the meal, President Carter just stood up with his water glass. The wine hadn't even been poured yet. He stood up with his water glass and he went to the podium and he made his toast. And then he sat down and he realized that he didn't even have wine in his glass yet. So he got a glass with wine. He went back up and he made the toast again a second time just to make sure it was official. But what he did was the toast had always been at the end of the evening. And he brought it to the beginning of the evening, and he decided he would do that at every event going forward, because then he didn't have to spend time worrying about his toast. He'd done it. It was out of the way. And every president since Jimmy Carter has followed that tradition. The toasts are now done at the beginning of the evening.
and I'm sure they're perhaps more civilized, given they're given before wine is consumed.
Yes.
But also,
Yes.
a great motivation to make the speeches shorter because you're waiting to get to the wine and the food.
And I think people stick to the script, yes.
Exactly. That's great. Let me just, a couple more questions about JFK. What was there something about the 1953 Chateau Mouton Rothschild he served? Something related to that?
Yes, JFK, there was a very famous summit that took place between the Soviet leader Khrushchev and John Kennedy, the American president. And Kennedy, he was also young. We talked about Jackie Kennedy being in early 30s. Well, Kennedy was in his early 40s. And here was Khrushchev, this more senior world statesman, viewed as a tough player. And they had a summit in Vienna. And as part of that, as I mentioned earlier, there are the reciprocal events. So for the lunches that each leader gives in honor of the other. So Khrushchev arrives fully armed with a huge assortment of Russian vodkas. And then he had some wine from the Soviet state of Georgia, which was a good winemaking area. I think it wasn't so great at the time because the Soviets had kind of ruined the wine industry, but he had his wine from Georgia and he had his vodka. Well, Kennedy decided he would take no chances. He didn't even decide he was going to bring great American wines. He brought Chateau Mouton Rothschild, 1953. And in terms of the, I don't know about the arms race, but in the wine race, Kennedy won that battle.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's one of those top four that we talked about.
Yes.
Terrific. And now, Lyndon Johnson. We mentioned Robert Mondavi. Lyndon Johnson invited Robert Mondavi to the White House. What was that all about?
Well, right after President Kennedy was assassinated, the next state visit was with the Prime Minister of Italy. And Lyndon Johnson was now president. And he wanted to invite some prominent Italian Americans to the White House. So he had Robert Mondavi, who was in business with his brother, Peter Mondavi, in California. They were not so well known, but they were starting to make wine and they were getting a growing business. And Robert Mondavi was told by people he knew in Washington, if you're coming to the White House, you need to know a couple things. First off, you need to rent a beautiful tuxedo. You need to really look great. Your wife needs to have a full-length mink coat, and you need to come in a limousine. Don't go driving up in a taxi, be in a limousine. So Mondavi followed all these instructions, And then when he got there, a lot of photos were taken of him and his wife with the president. And those photos slowly made their way out to California, to the San Francisco Chronicle newspaper and to the Napa Valley newspapers. And his brother, Peter, and more actually his brother's wife, saw these and saw this elaborate attire and the beautiful dress. And they were convinced that Robert Mondavi was embezzling money from the wine business. And the two brothers got into a fight, literally a fist fight, down on the floor, punching each other. And that broke up the business. Robert Mondavi went his separate way, decided he was going to head out on his own. And that led to the launch of Robert Mondavi's wine. And a wine that was served by many, many presidents since that occasion. So that White House event played really kind of a key role in the launch of a great American wine.
Wow. So even fallouts and disasters can lead to some positive results. Because, I mean, as we both said, Robert Mondavi is just iconic in terms of being the visionary for the California wine industry and pushing it ahead.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, so let me just screen share, and because I want to get to, is this Gerald Ford?
Yes.
Okay.
This was Gerald Ford. It was president when America had its 200th birthday, our bicentennial in 1976. And that's the Queen of England there, who had come to the United States for a very elegant, as you can tell, white tie event, state dinner hosted by the president. And when these state dinners take place, by the way, a lot of time is spent. A state dinner may last 3 or 4 hours, but weeks and months of planning go into every aspect of it, from the food to the flowers, the entertainment, the guest list, certainly, and the wines. And when it's the Queen of England, that is the highest level of state visit. There's nothing that's done diplomatically that has more attention paid in terms of a royal visit than the Queen of England. And this was Gerald Ford and Queen Elizabeth making their toast during the course of the state visit. And it was, he had rolled out, Gerald Ford had rolled out and made, speaking of great California wines, the wine he chose to serve to the Queen was Bullia Vineyards, George de la Tour Private Reserve. And that was one that, at the time was one of the greatest wines that you could find anywhere.
You know, all this preparation and planning, yet no wine consultant to tell them how to hold a wine glass. They both got it by the bowl.
Absolutely.
Wow, what can you do? I guess there's more important priorities.
Good eye. Only a true wine expert like you would notice that all three of them were holding the glass the wrong way.
Exactly. Well, I get lost in movies. I lose the plot going, what are they doing? Anyway, Martin Scorsese, call me. What does pulling a Nixon mean?
That was one of the great kind of mysteries or myths, I guess I could say, that I really set out to try to resolve in this book. Okay. And there were people who said that this story of, quote, pulling a Nixon was true, and there are others said, no, it never happened. And the story was that Nixon, who was quite a wine aficionado himself, which was surprising. I would rank him as one of the top-tier American presidents in terms of knowledge of wine and attention to wine that was served in the White House. And it was ironic because he'd grown up in very humble beginnings, and
he was just a Quaker, right?
He was yes,
a denomination of Christianity that kind of avoids alcohol.
Yes, they abstained from alcohol.
Okay.
So he'd grown up with that background, but he had a thirst for knowledge, so to speak, and he learned about wine, and he picked he spent a lot of time selecting the wines that were served in the White House. But one thing that was said about him was he would have a state dinner or an important event, and a great wine would be served to all of his guests. But there would be a separate waiter standing over behind his table with a bottle of wine with a cloth wrapped around it, obscuring the label, and he would pour that wine only to President Nixon, and that was always the best wine that was served. And it was frequently Chateau Margaux 1966. That was one of Nixon's favorites.
Oh, wow.
So this rumor had been told, and people said it's not true, and some people on those staff said yes, and they were all such. So I delved into it, and I found by no authoritative source less than Woodward and Bernstein.
Ah, famous Washington Post reporters.
Yes. Who broke the Watergate story, written numerous books. They found and they confirmed in their book called The Final Days that this was indeed true, and they had witnesses to President Nixon having a separate bottle served only for his use while his guests were served something else. So
That's
the term
truly damning
pulling a
testimony.
yes,
Yes.
yes,
That's fantastic. I love that. So pulling a
yes.
Nixon. Well, I've been guilty of serving decoy wines when people don't care about wines. Like, have this.
All right,
It's like, it's not anything mean. It's like, but if you don't value it. Anyway.
right,
Um,
right. I think
anyway,
we've all done that.
yeah, exactly. So we said that Jefferson planted vines, but he didn't make wine. There was only one president who made wine. Who was that?
Well, in terms of actually growing grapes, Jimmy Carter, who had been, he was our 39th president, he'd been a farmer. He owned a farm before he was president.
Okay.
He did other things too, but they grew grapes on that farm, and those grapes were made into wine. And then when he left office, he took the grapes and he made his own wine.
Oh, wow.
Not a huge production. He only makes about 100 bottles of it a year, and he donates them to various charities, and they auction it off because it's so unique. And I don't even know if anyone can attest to how good it is or not, because once they buy the bottle that's made by Jimmy Carter, they're hesitant to open it, so the bottle never gets opened.
Right.
But he made it, and then also Donald Trump, who was not a drinker, he owned a commercial winery, the first president to own a commercial winery in Virginia.
Oh, wow. And what was Carter's wine called? What was it named?
I think he just he kind of did it with his own label.
Oh, okay.
And made it on his farm in Plains, Georgia.
Like Jimmy Carter's Best Reserve or something?
I think it was something like that. Since it was only 100 bottles, I don't even know if they personalized the label. I've never had it,
Okay.
but I know that it's he's helped a lot of worthy causes by donating bottles that are auctioned off by people who are really curious to see it and to have it in their collection.
Awesome. All right. Now, you say that Ronald Reagan, whom you probably know best, having served with him, was was very wine knowledgeable. So here he is. How did he become so wine knowledgeable?
Well, I did have the honor of working in his White House and then serving as his chief of staff afterwards, and in the course of those roles to enjoy on many occasions wines with President Reagan and to hear his knowledge and his view on wines. He started off, he'd been an actor in Hollywood, and he got pneumonia in his late 30s.
Huh.
And his doctor said, it wouldn't hurt for you to have a glass of wine with dinner, just for your health. And Reagan didn't really know much about wine. He'd come from the Midwest, so he started learning. And he first became very knowledgeable on French wines, which at that time were still the dominant wine served in America. But then he became governor of California at this time when the California winemaking business was coming of age. And he played a huge role in elevating California wine and advancing it on the world stage and promoting trade with California wine. And was, by the way, beloved by the California winemakers and people like Robert Mondavi, and was close to Ronald Reagan, and Andrei Chelichev from Bulya Vineyards would actually, when he was in Washington, he'd come by and see President Reagan in the White House. They would talk about wine.
Wow.
But he had this love of California wine, and then when he was president, he made sure that California wine was served on all of our important events. That only on a couple of rare occasions was French wine served, and those were ones where I think afterwards he decided that this would be only California or only American wines would be served. In fact, one, Natalie, is that kind of ties into our two countries together, was when Pierre Trudeau came for a state visit in the 1980s. Ronald Reagan had discovered this California wine called Jordan, Jordan, Cabernet, and he really liked it, and he served it repeatedly. But one of the first times he served it was to Prime Minister Trudeau, and during the course of their exchange during the evening, Trudeau and Reagan got into conversation about the wine, and he told Trudeau about it, and after the state visit was over, Trudeau went and ordered a case of it for his own cellar.
Oh, wow.
And
Good
that was that
sampling
wine.
program. Yeah.
Yes, exactly, and that wine was served when President Reagan had the Supreme Court for dinner. He served that wine on more than one occasion when he had important foreign visitors. It was one that he really thought highly of.
Oh, it's an excellent wine. I've had it myself, and look for it on restaurant lists. It's a terrific
Yes.
wine. So how did Reagan celebrate birthdays when it came to wine?
Well, he had built an impressive cellar that while he was before he went to the White House and then after. And on his own birthday, I remember excuse me, it wasn't his birthday, it was an anniversary, but
Ah, yes.
his 33rd anniversary, he was in the White House as president. In his diary, he wrote that he and Nancy had enjoyed a bottle of 1911 Chateau Margaux for dinner in the White House residence on the night of their anniversary, and which was very unique because of it's what a rare wine from a magnificent vineyard, but
Yes.
also
Yes.
he it was the year he was born.
Oh,
But for birthdays, and as you've actually got on the screen now, for important occasions, he would pull a bottle out of his cellar. And when I was working for him as his chief of staff when he was former president, he came in on my birthday with a beautiful bottle of wine, Chateau Mouton Rothschild,
wow.
from the year I was born, 1955,
My
that he had
goodness.
taken from his cellar, and he had signed Fred Cheers, Ronald Reagan, and gave it to me as a birthday gift. And it's something that was just such a wonderful, thoughtful gift that I have saved to this day.
Oh, wow. I guess you're not opening that one.
Well, at some point I have to, but I keep waiting for the right occasion. What is the right occasion to open a bottle of wine that a president of the United States assigned to you?
Oh, well, that is a very good question. I just interviewed former Wall Street Journal tastings columnist John Brecher and Dorothy Gator, who invented Open That Bottle Night. So there you go. There's an
Well,
opportunity.
you know what? It's so coincidental that you mentioned that, because I always read that column when they wrote it, and
Yes.
I got an email 2 nights ago from Dorothy saying, "I heard you have this bottle of wine. Saturday night is open your favorite bottle night, and you should open it." And I said,
Exactly.
"I think I will." So I'm taking advice from the very best sources on this.
You shouldn't let them know. They'd be so excited because this is a big deal for them, big celebration. It's always the last Saturday in February, and although you don't have to wait for that annual thing, but what they did is they got the question so often. I have this very special or old bottle. When should I open it? And the second question was, how much do you think it's worth? Is what they would
Yeah.
ask. But they on their first column, they hoped to get a few responses from this column. They got 1,000 letters back when you had to write letters. It
Wow.
wasn't so easy to email, and they were nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for that column in the Wall Street Journal. So pretty
They're
special for
terrific.
them.
Well,
Yeah.
she's convinced me, I think, this Saturday night it's also my oldest daughter's birthday. So
There you
they
go.
both, it sounds like the stars are aligning.
I think so. That's great. So let me backtrack a bit here on this is Air Force One, is it?
Yes.
Okay.
President Reagan would, on appropriate occasions, sometimes if it's someone's birthday, as it was here, uh, surprise everyone by having a cake brought out and open a bottle of champagne to toast someone on their birthday if they had to be traveling and away from their family doing their duty on the White House staff. And that was the particular occasion here with him and Nancy Reagan. And also, if he had been on a summit or on a very important foreign visit on the way back, President Reagan would always make sure that a bottle of champagne was open and everybody had a chance to raise their glass and toast to the success of the summit.
Oh, that's fantastic. Did Air Force One have like a little mini cellar or anything like that?
Well, just a few bottles on there that they always wanted to have them available in case the president or one of his guests felt like a glass of wine. So there'd be a nice selection, but not a cellar of great consequence.
Space would be limited. Now, Ronald Reagan was very savvy. He chose a very diplomatic wine, I think, for this dinner. And maybe you can tell us more about it. It's the Opus One, I believe.
Yes, this was in 1987, and the Prime Minister of France, Jacques Chirac, and his wife had come to the White House, and Chirac and Reagan had been friends for many years. Chirac had been the mayor of Paris, and Reagan's governor of California, so they knew each other well, and they had shared wine together. And now here they are, the respective leaders of their two countries, and Chirac is coming to the White House. And here's France, the world's wine superpower, coming. And so you had to do something that balanced that with the desire of American presidents to showcase the best in America and showcase the best American wine. So Ronald Reagan came up with a very diplomatic solution. he served Opus One, the joint venture between Philippe de Rothschild of Chateau Mouton Rothschild and Robert Mondavi, a joint Franco-American venture, and it was the perfect wine, and it was very well received that evening.
Perfect blended
Yes.
diplomacy. Very nice. All right, that's great. And now you mentioned that several of the first ladies were also knowledgeable about wine. Tell us about Michelle Obama, getting to more recent times.
Yes, Michelle Obama was knowledgeable and enthusiastic about wine. You know, her husband described himself as more of a beer man,
Okay.
and he enjoyed beer. In fact, he even made in very small numbers. They made some beer at the White House, and he
Oh,
released
wow.
his recipe to the public on exactly how he made it. But Michelle Obama would have occasionally with her girlfriends a little wine tasting. And she was actually out in Virginia, Northern Virginia, not far from Washington, about an hour away. There's a winery called RDV, and it stands the initials of the winemaker and owner, Rutger de Vink. And he is doing a spectacular job making wine, incredible quality wine. And she was there with her friends, and they went into the tasting room and they gave it a try, and they really liked the wine. And as a result, it became the first Virginia wine served at a state dinner. She served it just a couple of months later when there was a big state occasion at the White House. And she was always played a role in selecting the wines that were served for important events. And she made a point to make sure that her guests were always very well entertained and served, showcased great American wines.
And I think she even belongs to a wine club, she gets regular wine shipments or something. I think she's quite the wine fan.
She is, yes.
Yeah. So let's take it back to Barack here. You can see this on your screen.
Yes.
Okay.
There, of course, our two countries come together. Justin Trudeau there with Barack Obama for dinner at the White House. I think they're getting slightly closer to holding those glasses the right way, as you
Yeah.
admit, but they're still not all the way down on the stem, right?
Well, diplomatic, progress takes a time, right? Like all
Right.
things. Oh, goodness.
An interesting story from that. I've been working now on what will be the next chapter about President Biden,
Oh, okay.
and I've been researching what he served at the vice president's residence, and he is a non-drinker. And interestingly, three of the last four presidents, Biden, Trump, George W. Bush, were non-drinkers. Of course, they made sure that the spectacular wines were always served. That was never an impediment to wine service. But I've been learning a lot about the toasts, particularly that Joe Biden has done over the years. And I found one when he was up visiting shortly after that visit of Justin Trudeau to the White House. He was up in Canada on a visit, and he made a toast. And he pointed out, in making his toast, he pointed out that during the time that Justin Trudeau was down in Washington, President Obama had sent his vice president, Joe Biden, out of the country on an important mission. And so when Joe Biden was making his toast at this later event, he raised his glass to Trudeau and he said, "It's very nice to be able to meet you. I want you to know that I think Obama thought you would like me better when you were in Washington, so he sent me out of the country so you wouldn't meet me."
Well, it ended up that they came together anyway.
Yes,
But
yes.
I was thinking too, just all of this cross-border diplomacy. The wine that I'm going to open in your honor tonight, Fred, is this one,
Oh, fantastic.
Federalist with Ben Franklin. So
Yes.
I don't know if he was quite a wine aficionado. He seemed to be everything, leading all.
Yes,
their-
he was. Benjamin Franklin was over in Paris as America's emissary just before Thomas Jefferson was, as we were talking earlier about how Thomas Jefferson used that time to learn so much. Well, when he arrived, Benjamin Franklin was already there and had already begun to dive deep into French wines and had his own cellar of more than 2,000 bottles in Paris, and helped introduce Thomas Jefferson to the key wine figures in France. So that's a very appropriate wine to be serving.
All right. Awesome. And I just wanted to show the wine cellar of the White House because I think it would surprise people if you can see it here.
Yes, Natalie, when I worked there, I was interested in wine, and I wanted to see the White House wine cellar. And I asked repeatedly. I pled with the person in charge of the White House facilities to show me the wine cellar. And finally, I guess I just bugged him so much. He said, "All right, okay, come on over. I'm going to show it to you." And I had this illusion of these big arches and stone bricks and on the wall and decades, centuries of dust, and maybe there would be an odd bottle of Thomas Jefferson's wine still over in the corner or something. And I knew today, for example, the Queen of England has a wine cellar with more than 30,000 bottles of wine in it.
Wow.
The Élysée Palace in France, in fact, there's a picture right there of the Élysée Palace wine cellar. It has more than 18,000 bottles of wine.
Wow.
So I have this image of the president's wine cellar. I go over there, and just as you showed, it's just a little closet. It's a pantry.
My goodness.
The huge wine cellars that have been built over the years have been replaced during different remodelings of the White House. And it holds about 300 bottles, as you can see there. That's the chief usher of the White House. It's got little wood slats, so they can put up to 300 bottles in there to have a few in case the presidents have some guests over who'd like a glass of wine. And then for state visits, and instead of the old model where wine would be bought years in advance and aged and taken out for state visits, now it's bought on an event-by-event basis. If there's a visit coming up, they'll buy 2 or 3 cases, whatever it takes to serve that crowd, and that will be served, and no wine will be bought until it's selected for the next state visit.
That is amazing. Wow, I think that would surprise a lot of people to see that.
Yes.
So, Fred, you've been so generous with your time. As we wrap up, do you have a favorite memory of wine and the White House, or just wine in general, like just a moment where it was a really special experience?
Yes, I would say I had an interesting experience. It was right after I left the White House, but involved President Reagan, just coming back to him and his enjoyment of wine. You may remember, well, this was now at least 20 years ago, the program 60 Minutes on CBS did a special about the Mediterranean diet and how these French people who drank a lot of wine and ate food that had its fair share of cholesterol in it were living longer lives and better heart health, and he embraced that completely. And his drink of choice would be a glass of red wine. And I remembered when he left office, he would go out and speak to different groups as a former president. He would give a speech, and then afterwards there would be a dinner, and he would sit with the guests through a large banquet sometimes. And I would always sit about a table away from him. I didn't want to take up a seat at his table since people were so anxious to talk to him. But I would, again and again, I would see the same pattern occur. And I'll never forget it. It was the waiters would come over and they would take the order of the drinks from the guests. And some people would order a cocktail or a martini or a beer or whatever. And President Reagan would order a glass of red wine. And while they were away, the waiter was away, would see him lean over and tell the story about the Mediterranean diet and how red wine was actually good for you and it promoted better quality of life and longer life. And then I would watch when the waiter came over with the drinks that had been ordered, he would take his glass of red wine down and everyone else would cancel their previous order and ask for a glass of red wine. And without fail, the red wine would be there and they would all take a glass and they would toast each other on their red wine.
Oh, no, that's leadership.
Yes, absolutely.
That's great. So I just want to remind everyone who's watching this beautiful book. You could win a signed copy. Gorgeous 450. I mean, just the illustrations, and I'm scared to drop it. But but all you have to do is pick your favorite social media channel and post a wine that you've enjoyed lately, preferably an American wine, and tag me, and we'll choose one person to get this. Now, Fred, this book, all of the proceeds are actually going to the White House Historical Association. Is that correct?
Yes, the White House Historical Association is a nonprofit, non-political group whose goal is to teach people around the world about the White House itself, and particularly young students. And all expenses for the book were underwritten, so every penny of the purchase price goes to educate young people about history and about the White House.
That is fantastic, a good cause and a great subject. And where can people find this to purchase it online?
Amazon.com is probably the easiest. It can be
Sure.
done with one click. It's available there. It's available at White House Historical Association. Some American wineries are now selling it, and some retail stores, but Amazon is the quickest and easiest, probably.
Oh, fantastic. So, Fred, I raise my glass, which will be filled with the Federalist tonight, to you. And thank you so much for this great conversation. Great stories and such a gorgeous book. Congratulations on it.
Well, thank you, Natalie. Thank you for having me on your show. And also, let me just say thank you to you for all you do to educate Canadians and Americans and people around the world about wine. What you do is really so enlightening, and you also make it fun and enjoyable, which is what wine should be, right?
Absolutely. I love my job. I try my best. So thank you so much, Fred.
My pleasure.
All
Take care.
right.